And then as people, if anybody else decides to join us, that's great. So I'm going to start just by this week, what is on our agenda for this week. So today, if you've done your quick bread lab from last week, there's a lab evaluation that I put as due today, but I know not everybody's had a chance to make their quick bread yet. But if you have, make sure that you fill out the lab evaluation. And then tomorrow there is, and it's all these things are already open because I opened them last night, or the assignment that's for tomorrow. It looks like it's a quiz. You'll see a puzzle piece by the breads worksheet. It's a quick and yeast breads worksheet. It's not a quiz, but I set it up through Schoology because then Schoology corrects it and I don't have to correct, 100 and some of these. So it is. I found out one student told me that she went in and, hi Ellie, see just come in. She went out to check on an answer, and then when she came back, she couldn't get back in. So I changed it to unlimited instead of just one try. So hopefully you can get back in, but you might have to do a split screen, or you might, if you can, take a screenshot or a picture of your answers, because she said she went back in and then her stuff was gone. So I reset it to unlimited, and I hope that works. But just as a heads up, you might want to make sure you have your answers before if you have to leave the screen and go to check on answers. Because I did put a folder with the chapter. I took pictures of each page of the chapter that those questions are from, or you can use the function of ingredient notes or the yeast bread notes that are all in that same folder. Wednesday is our next chart of cooking terms. Knead is the first one, and then there's some terms like dice and cube because next week is fruits and vegetables. So that's why you see some of those terms on that chart. Thursday you can watch, I did 2 videos. I did one on the Magic Marshmallow Crescent Puffs, and I did one on the pizza dough yesterday. So the lab for Friday is yeast bread dough, and I know that yeast is a little challenging to get right now in the grocery store. In fact, the last time I went, it wasn't there. Now, my neighbor said she got some at Aldi, so if you shop at Aldi, you might want to check. I told her the next time she goes to get me some, because usually I have some, so I'm fine for a while, but I do like to make homemade pizza dough and cinnamon rolls and some other things. So it's nice to have some yeast on hand. But if you don't, then I did the Magic Marshmallow Crescent Puffs, which we usually did in class, which are the crescent rolls you buy in the tubes, just like the biscuits that we used when we did the pizza bubble bread, if you did that recipe. So I gave you, there's a link that I found that has 70 different recipes you can make with crescent rolls. So if you didn't want to do the Magic Marshmallow Crescent rolls, which those puffs are like a cinnamon roll, and they're really good. If you want to do that, you can, but if you wanted to make something else with crescent rolls, or there's lots of different recipes you could make with biscuits in the tube, because those would all be yeast breads. And then that's Friday's lab. And there's some other videos on Thursday about showing you how to knead dough. And I showed you that in my video that I made yesterday. Questions on anything for this week? Okay, I'm going to bring up, I'll take my base off for now. I'm going to bring up the yeast bread notes, and it looks like a lot, but I'm not going to read this word for word because that'll just be boring, but I am going to go through and just highlight some things and talk about the differences between a yeast bread and a quick bread. And obviously, first ingredient, flour. Flour is the same. It's the structure, the framework, and we talked about this last week with quick breads. It has something, the protein part called the gluten, which has the elastic strands. Liquid, you can use water or milk. In the recipe I use, it's water. Your water needs to be 110 to 125 degrees. I was able to just use my hot tap water, and then I took my, actually candy thermometer and got it up to about 120. So that's what you want to do. If it's not hot enough, the yeast won't activate. And if you go too hot, like say you got it really hot and it was at 135, that can kill the yeast, which means it doesn't work. And the yeast is the leavening agent, which makes it rise. So far, we've been using baking soda and baking powder, baking soda in cookies, and then baking soda and baking powder in quick breads. Now it's yeast. And yeast comes in a packet, or you can get it in a jar, in a granular form in a jar, or you can get it in a compressed block in the refrigerator department. And they didn't have any of those when I was at Cub a couple weeks ago. They may now, because I haven't gone for 2 weeks, because as a single person I can, go about every 2 weeks, I'm fine. So they may have it, but I know it's hard to find now with what's going on. Yeast is a fungus, so when you put it into the water, it's going to stink. I always tell students it kind of smells like stinky feet, which isn't a great smell, but that's what you'll see on number 3 here. The breakdown of sugar into carbon dioxide and alcohol by the yeast is fermentation. And that's what it's doing. It's fermenting. It's making that nasty smell. Sugar browns and flavors, and it's a food for the yeast. So there's a teaspoon of sugar in our recipe just to help the yeast activate. And then we have fats, which have the same qualities as quick breads, makes it tender and keeps it soft. Eggs, again, have all those properties: flavor, richness, color. In a loaf of bread, it makes the crumbs fine and the crust more tender. There's a teaspoon of salt in the recipe. We know that salt would add flavor, but it also controls the action of the yeast and slows down the rising time, because you don't want it to rise and then drop right away. It's a slow process. Mixing of yeast doughs, in your book, it'll talk about the conventional and the quick mixing methods. The conventional is very similar to what I call the straight dough method. All the ingredients are combined, you knead your dough, and you set it aside to rise. So yesterday, I made my dough, I kneaded it, and then I rolled it out, put my butter and cinnamon and sugar, rolled it up, and then I let it rise. I suppose I let it rise for about an hour and a half before I baked it. Now, usually you don't need to. It depends on how warm your house is, and because warm is better for rising breads. Sponge method is where they combine the ingredients and they punch it down and they let it rise again. Some of you, if you've watched any of the network, Food Network shows, sometimes you'll see them do that, where they punch it down. And then the third way up here on the top is a batter or no knead. Exactly what it says. You mix it up, but you don't have to knead the dough. So if you searched or went into a cookbook, it might say batter bread, and that's what that would mean. Kneading the dough, there's a 3-step method: push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. And again, I showed that to you in my video, and then the clips that I found also will show you that method. So you put a little bit of flour down on your board, your dough, and you have to put flour on your hands because otherwise it's going to stick. The dough is going to be sticky when it comes out of the bowl. So you need a little bit of flour, and you can add a little bit of flour as you need, but you don't want to add a lot, because the more flour, the more tough your dough will be, and then you won't have a nice either pizza crust or, in my case, cinnamon rolls. How to tell if your dough has been kneaded enough? You have to knead it for about 5 to 8 minutes, and I was about at 5. Mine came together pretty quickly yesterday, and in the video I tell you these different methods. If it's smooth and satiny, that's a good thing. If you can drop it from your hand in about 15 seconds where it doesn't still stick to your hand, you can stretch the top of the dough and see tiny bubbles. And I tested it yesterday, and I could see a few bubbles, but I needed to go a little bit longer. And the one that works really the best, I think, is number 4. If the indent stays in the dough, it's kneaded enough. So you just take your finger and you push it in, And if that indent stays, that means you've kneaded it enough. If it slowly comes back out, then you need to keep kneading. And then just a couple tips for making a loaf of bread. So this is like the loaf pan, like if you made banana bread. You place it in a grease pan to rise. And to test for doneness, one way is color. Obviously, it'll be golden brown if it's a loaf of bread. You tap it and it sounds hollow, which is very hard when you're a new baker and haven't made a lot of bread. Obviously, it's too high to do what they call the toothpick test, which you do when you're making a cake, where you put the toothpick in, and when you take it out, it's clean. If you still see dough on your toothpick, and some of you, if you made shortcake last week, that might have been the way you tested it, the toothpick method. So you can't do that with bread. So it's a little bit harder until you've made it enough to know what tapping it sounds hollow. That's tricky, but that's how it's kind of like the old watermelon where you tap it, it sounds hollow, and it's supposed to be more riper. I'll come back and put my base back up for you. So as I read through that, can anybody tell me what are some of the differences between a quick bread and a yeast bread? You can either type it in or you can unmute yourself and tell me what are some of the differences between the yeast breads that we're going to do and you're going to learn about this week versus the quick breads. Okay, Ryan says rise. And kneading the dough, yes. So first of all, we could say right away the method. Quick breads are quicker. They're going to take longer, so time. You have to let it rise or you have to knead the dough. We didn't have to do that with a quick bread. The yeast, the rising ingredient is yeast, not baking soda or baking powder. But then there are some similarities. You're still going to have sugar to brown and flavor. Salt would be flavor. Flour is going to bring it together in your bowl. I mixed mine by hand. You can use the dough hook if you prefer to do that. If you have the KitchenAid or a mixer that has the dough hook, I did mine by hand, so it doesn't matter. But anything else you can think of that's different? I guess just the mixing method would be maybe another different than the biscuit or the muffin method in quick breads versus the conventional straight dough, or the quick no knead would be the other differences. All right. Does anybody have questions on anything I talked about or any of the assignments this week? If you can't find yeast, but if you can find, crescent rolls or biscuits in the tube, you could even, I gave you crescent rolls, maybe I can even find, there's lots of things you can do with biscuits. If you just Googled recipes for refrigerator biscuits, other than our pizza bubble bread, there's some that are sweet, like you can make cinnamon rolls from them. So there's lots of things you can do. Maybe it'll be interesting to see how creative people can come up with. Questions? Okay. Well, then I will see you next Monday. People are telling me they like Mondays. They like the beginning of the week to learn what everything is for the week. So that's what I've been doing. It doesn't matter to me, but if that helps everybody to understand what they have to do for the week, great. Everything I opened last night, except I realized I forgot to open the worksheet, but I did that now after first hour this morning. So it should be ready to go. Have a good week. Hope everybody stays healthy.